In all of history, some people have stood out in front of the rest. Culture has always looked up to this person, calling him or her a hero. The ancient Greeks had Hercules, Achilles, Odysseus, men who were valiant in battle and courageous in the face of death. Fairy tales account for brave men willing to slay dragons to rescue the damsel and restore peace to a broken land. Now, comic books depict these figures as vigilantes dressed in masks and capes, saving their city from the terror of an evil villain. Movies and television show us time and time again what a hero looks like. Some of them have capes and others have metal suits named Jarvis. We have always loved the hero, but what does this character look like in the real world? What if we define the hero as selfless, and instead of lusting for selfish gain, they desire good, that he sacrifices his own needs for the needs of others around him? What if they are someone who inspires us, someone who takes hold of our hearts and beckons us to live better, to be a light to us when all other lights have been extinguished, to be the hope we need when it seems like all courage has been broken, to be utterly destroyed and beaten, all for the sake of the weak and the oppressed? What if the hero is an ordinary individual who finds the strength to persevere and endure in spite of overwhelming obstacles?
If you have your Bible with you this morning, will you open them up to 1 Kings? 1 Kings chapter 18. And to comment from Kevin and Beth on the welcome, which they did a fantastic job on. His comment of Superman, how is it possible he wears glasses and no one knows he's Superman? I recently got a pair of reading glasses, which I'm not wearing today. I wore them last week to cover up a scar, which is healed up. Long story, not getting into that. But I wore my reading glasses last week, and no one once thought I was Superman. So I would like to say I think that works. So, all right, 1 Kings chapter 18, and we're going to start in verse 41. And it says this. It says, and Elijah said to Ahab is the king, and Elijah said to Ahab, go, eat and drink, for there is the sound of a heavy rain. So Ahab went off to eat and drink, but Elijah climbed to the top of Carmel, which is a mountain, climbed to the top of Mount Carmel, bent down to the ground, and put his face between his knees. Go and look toward the sea, he told his servant, and he went up and looked. There is nothing there, he said. 7 times Elijah said, go back. The 7th time, the servant reported, a cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea. So Elijah said, go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you. Meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds, the wind rose, a heavy rain started falling, and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. The power of the Lord came on Elijah, and tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. Now, we're going to break some stuff apart in a little bit. And there is so much in that story that we instantly want to cover. Like, that's a cool story. For one, you need to know that there hasn't been any rain for 3.5 years. So Elijah saying there's going to be rain is a pretty big deal because they've experienced a 3.5-year drought. And I don't know about you, but the part that sticks out to me the most, at least initially, is when he outruns the chariot. That's pretty cool, right? And I don't know what the significance of is he tucks his cloak into his belt. I don't know, that just seems awesome. The power of God comes on him and he's like, all right, I'm going to make a run for it. Does that. I don't know if that bear any significance to his speed, if the cloak waving out slowed him down and you didn't think he could save it, but I just think that's a really cool spot. But of all the things we could talk about, I want to pull out this one spot that's right in the middle of the story, and I think it's at verse 43, and this is what it says. So he tells his servant, go and look toward the sea, he told his servant, and he went up and looked. There is nothing there, he said. And 7 times Elijah said, go back. Now, we almost miss the significance of it because it says it so quickly in the passage. So it's more aptly like, instead of just saying 7 times he said go back, it would be like, hey, go look towards the sea. There's nothing there. All right, go back. There's nothing there. Okay, go back. And I don't know like how frustrated he got as he went through that. I don't know if he was like calm and cool and collected the whole time. Just like, it's okay, man. Just go. Just go back. Trust me. I don't know if the servant was getting more frustrated, but I think that's such an amazing part of the story. That here they have the spot where it has not rained in this land for 3.5 years. For 3.5 years, they've had a drought. And Elijah has the courage to promise the king that it's going to rain. He says, hey, it's going to rain. You better hurry up because it's about to pour down and you're not going to be able to make it. So it's going to rain. And then he stops and he prays and he tells the servant, go back, go back, go back, go back, go back, go back. And the servant comes back the last time and he goes, there's a cloud as small as a man's hand. He's like, okay, for the first time, there's like an itty bitty rain cloud. And Elijah can already hear the pouring rain. He can already hear the rain coming. And this is what I wonder. I don't know about you, but as I hear that story, I wonder like, for us, how many times would we tell the servant to go back? Like, even if we believe that God told us that it was going to rain, how many times within that would we have the courage? How much persistence would we have to tell the servant to go back? And like, I know, like, if it was my children, I know they'd be perfectly fine. I know they could tell the servant 7 times, like, keep going back, because that's how our conversations go. It's like, can I have a snack? No. Can I have a snack? No. Can I have a snack? No, you can't have one now. You can have one later. When's later? It's later. Is it later now? No, it's not later. It'll be later. It feels like later now. Can I have a snack now? No. And so it's like I think they could do that. But for me, honestly, I don't have that. And I don't know where you fall within that. But I don't think I'd have the courage to keep sending the servant back over and over again. Like, for me, it kind of functions like this. If you say something to me and I don't understand the words that you're saying, I'll say what? Like, because I'm curious. If you say it again and I don't understand again, I will ask what a second time. It'll be like, what? Like, kind of like prone my ears. Like, I really do want to hear you. If the third time you tell me something and I still can't understand you, I'm just going to nod my head and smile. Like, I'm not going to ask what again because by then it's awkward. So it's like, what? What? Mm-hmm. Like, I hope you didn't insult me and tell me you're going to kill me and my family. Like, mm-hmm. Okay. But like, that's what I find for myself. Like, that's about the amount of persistence I have to keep pushing. But for Elijah, it's so distinctly different that he's got the courage within there to go back, go back. And I think there's something about him that we need to pull out. There's something distinct about his character and his personality that maybe should be more evident within us. I would describe it like this, that Elijah is stubborn in his faith. Now, I think there's a difference between having stubborn faith and being stubborn in his faith. And this is kind of how I see it, that I often see people who have stubborn faith. And that's almost a sense of they're not open to correction. They're not open to new ideas. They're unwilling to engage and discuss their faith. Which for us as a church, that's one of the big things we wanted to kind of change about the culture of Christians. And we sought to do that through our small groups, that we wanted it to be like comfortable and okay to have a conversation about faith. To like just talk openly about what you believe and how your beliefs are leading you. Because I think most of the time when it comes to faith, our conversation is this, like, oh, so you're a Christian? Yeah. End of discussion. And it's like, if we're going to talk about faith, I'm going to state my belief, you're going to state your belief. If they disagree, we'll argue. But any more than that, there's no conversation on faith. And I don't think that's healthy. So for many of us, our faith, it's a stubborn faith in the sense that it's very closed off. And as soon as we think we believe something, we just hold on to it tightly. And it's like, well, there can be no other. If somebody says something that we don't necessarily initially believe, we just write that person off. But Elijah's different. He doesn't have a stubborn faith. He's not closed in his faith. He is stubborn in his faith. And this is how I see the distinction, is that Elijah will converse about his faith. He'll talk about his faith, which we see throughout Scripture. But when he feels like God has clearly revealed something to him, he does not budge. And so Elijah's in this spot within this kingdom where it has been a drought for 3.5 years. For 3.5 years, there has been no rain. And he feels like God has clearly told him that it is going to rain. And so he's unwilling to go back. And I've got to think his posture is more like this. The servant comes like, there's no rain. And it's just kind of a, go back. Trust me. I know it's going to rain. And I don't know what the kind of like the thoughts of the servant were. Like, oh my goodness, this guy is never going to give up. How many times is he going to? Sometime I'm just not going to come back. That's what's going to happen. But Elijah's there. Go back. It's okay. Go back. I'm not necessarily being closed off, but I know clearly this is what God has told me, and so I'm not going to budge from that. And I think that gets a hard thing for many of us when it comes to our faith is that how do I know when God has told me something? How do I know the distinction between having stubborn faith and being stubborn in my faith? And this is how it's worked for me in my life. Is that, and I've said, like, people say, like, God told me. And I always want to be like, okay, did he actually tell you? Like, did you hear a voice? And it's like, well, no. Well, then he didn't necessarily tell you, because tell you is to speak. I don't mean to tell you, like, God didn't speak to you, but he didn't tell you, so he didn't. But like when people use that phrase, it always throws me off because for me personally, God has never told me anything like that. Like, and some of you may have, and you go, God, I heard a voice. And I'll be like, good for you. That would freak me out, but that's good for you. But for me, this is how I've understood it. That when God has revealed something to me, maybe is the language that I'm more comfortable with, is when I know deeply that I am called to do something that I have no desire to do. That's when I know God speaks to me. That's when I know he reveals something to me. And I look at the situation, I look at the different things going on, and I go, that is my last option. I do not want to do that. And everything within me goes, you have to do that. And I kind of have this internal war of going, no, I don't want to do that. Yeah, but I'm going to, but I don't want to do that. And that's when I know. And I think for Elijah, he's got to feel that in that moment of just I don't want to tell the king that it's going to rain because there's a lot at stake and it's been 3.5 years. But he's firm within that. He's stubborn within what God has revealed to him. And I just want to pause here for a second in this story. And we're going to look at some other stuff in Elijah today. But I think this instance is very important to understanding his character. And I wonder this. How often do we give up maybe on the 3rd time? Or the 5th time? Like, how often does maybe God reveal something to us or God lead us into something, and we assume that if God has revealed something to us, then it must happen right away? Like, how often do we have things that we feel like God has maybe promised us or God is directing us into, and we assume like instantly that means it happens just like this? And there's this distinction that happens that we see between Scripture and our lives commonly today, that we assume that miracles are always easy. And it's kind of like this sense of, well, I feel like if God would just intercede and make this happen, then everything would absolutely be a piece of cake in my life. But you look at Elijah here, he almost in a sense has to work for the miracle. He has to have faith that endures past the doubt and past the struggle. And I wonder in my head, like, did he shake? Did he question? Did he wonder? Like within him, did he like, when he sent the servant back, was it like anything in his head going, man, I really hope it works out this time. Like there better be a cloud. There better be a something because I'm starting to feel a little foolish. I don't know. But the important thing within Elijah is that he keeps sending the servant back. Whatever doubts he may have had, whatever struggles he may have faced, he acts in faith. He keeps sending the servant back. And I look at that and I think, man, I wish I had faith like that. I don't know about you. But I think I wish I had faith that could be stubborn in what God has revealed. I wish I had faith that could endure like that. And the funny thing about Elijah's story is that he didn't always have faith like that. Because as you open up Scripture, we find that story in chapter 18. Chapter 18 is a grand testament to Elijah as a champion of faith. And then you move over one chapter to chapter 19. And it's the story about how he breaks and fails quickly. And that's actually where I want to spend most of our time today. So if you have your Bible, we're going to move over one chapter to 1 Kings 19. And let me catch you up on what's going on. So last week, if you weren't here, or for a refresher for those of you who are here, I know most of you, you hang on to every word that I say, and you memorize it throughout the week, so this is just a weird recap, but I'll go ahead and do it anyway, just for your sake. So in chapter 18, we see this incredible story that the nation of Israel has turned from God. And they've begun worshiping other gods, in particularly this god by the name of Baal. And what happens, Elijah has this incredible showdown where they set up altars and they put bulls down and they ask God to answer by fire. And so if you've never heard the story, you need to go back and read it in chapter 18. But what happens is the prophets of Baal ask the god Baal that they've made up to answer by fire and nothing comes. And then Elijah goes and he asks the God who we know to answer by fire, and he does. And so it's this incredibly moving, powerful moment of revealing who is actually God in their lives. And then Elijah does something that really throws me off, and this is actually right before the verse that we cut off at last week, is right after God answers by fire. And all the people in the crowd who wavered say the Lord, he is God, the Lord, he is God. The next thing Elijah does is he goes, okay, get the prophets of Baal and kill them. And I read that, and I remember the kid reading that, and I'd just be like, whoa, that got bloody fast. And it threw me off. And I'm not going to get into all the reasons why. We don't have time for all the reasons why today. Some people view it as a flippant decision by Elijah out of anger to have the prophets killed. Other people view it as God using that to purify the city and make sure the people didn't turn back to the prophets of Baal. Regardless of whatever the reason was, we need to acknowledge that it happened. So they have this grand moment, and then all of a sudden Elijah goes, get all the prophets of Baal and kill all of them. And so they do. And then he has that moment where he sees the rain cloud and he calls him he endures in his faith and he moves on. So we have these two incredible stories back and forth of Elijah calling down fire and then Elijah calling down rain from heaven. And then this is what happens in chapter 19. Chapter 19, verse 1. It says, now Ahab, who was the king, told Jezebel, who had a kingdom of her own. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them. I want to pause right here. If we know nothing else about Elijah, if we just know these two stories, what would you expect Elijah to do next? He has just called down fire from heaven. And then he has just called down water from heaven when there had been a drought. I don't know, does anybody remember the cartoon Captain Planet? He's going through all the elements right here. He's got water, he's got fire. I think there was earth, and it's your powers combined. No one else Captain Planet fan? I just wanted to thank you, some of you. I just wanted to take you back on that memory train. With your powers combined, I'm Captain Planet. He was a great superhero, whatever. We'll keep going. So we would expect as he moved through this, we would expect Elijah comes back and come and get me, right? Fire from heaven, water from heaven, lone lady threatens his life. He stares down 450 prophets and taunts them. He trash talked them as they're cutting themselves over an altar. So these are some mentally disturbed people, and he does not flinch. And then this one person, Jezebel, says, I'm going to go after you. And this is what happens in verse 3. It says, Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. It says, when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. We need to pause here, because that's where it gets really bad. Not only is he scared and runs from this lady, he leaves his servant in the city. Now that doesn't seem like a very big detail, but like we know she's after him. He leaves his servant behind and flees into the wilderness. And what's going to happen when she catches his servant? Yeah, he's gone. And so he's like, hey, I'm gonna go hide in the woods. You stay here. That's like you see like intruders coming around your house. And it's like, honey, I'm gonna go hide under the bed. If you'll just stay by the door to let him in, I'm sure things will be fine for you. It'll be good. Like that's what Elijah does to servant. Dude, you just stay here in the city. I'm gonna go back in the woods. It'll be okay, man. So he leaves his servant. While he goes off, it says he came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. The great Elijah gets scared to death and hides and wishes that he'll die. Like, I don't understand this because I read through his stories and I see a faith that is greater than my own. I see a faith that I can just admire. I don't think I can duplicate. I can just admire that kind of faith. And then all of a sudden in a moment, it comes crashing down. And it's interesting if you point out, we get a glimpse into the internal monologue that's going on in Elijah's head. He says this, take my life, I am no better than my ancestors. This is what he's saying. God, I failed you. Just like everyone else in my family has failed you. Just like I failed you before. Just like I'll probably fail you again. You might as well just let me go. It's amazing the power of our inner monologue when we struggle in faith and the stories that we begin to tell ourselves, right? Like when a lack of faithfulness or sin enters our lives, it's amazing how quickly we can begin telling ourselves a story about how this is where God leaves us. He must be done with me now. There's no way that I should have seen what I've seen and experienced what I've experienced and still fail at this point in time. And that's what Elisha begins saying. I can't believe I have screwed up just like everyone else has screwed up. God, you might as well just leave me here to die because I know you've left me. But it's within this point in his story that we see the distinction between Elijah and God, and where we see the distinction between ourselves and God. Because this is not the end of Elijah's story. And I think it's important for you to know that this is also not the end of your story. No matter what the experiences were, no matter what the failure was in the moment, no matter what story you are playing through in your head, the page turns and the chapter keeps going. Because at this point in time, we see the key shift is it ceases to be Elijah's story and it now becomes just distinctly God's story. This is how it reads at the end of verse 5. It says, all at once, an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. We're going to come back to the cave much later. But I want you to see this distinction because this is so massive to me. Is Elijah thinks his story is done. He thinks God has left him. And the very next movement that we see is we see God is very present there. And I don't know exactly like what tone the angel used. I don't know if it was like a soft, sympathetic mother, like hey, Elijah, hey, get up and eat. I don't know if like the angel was annoyed at that point in time, like, get up, come on. Like you sent the water and the fire and now you're here. Just get up and let's go. But regardless of what tone he used, the distinct point is that God doesn't leave Elijah there. And it's there that I see this massive difference that I think is so important for us to understand. Is that for Elijah, he is called to be faithful. We could say it like this, that faithful is what we are called to be. For each one of us in our lives, we are called to be faithful to what God has laid down before us. But within that acknowledgement that we are called to be faithful must be an understanding that we will falter, that we will not perfectly run our race that God has set out before us. And so there will be weaknesses, there will be struggles, there will be moments of doubt from time to time. But the distinction is that what we have within us and the attributes that we possess are not the same that God possesses. And so faithful is what we are called to be, but faithful is who God is. Let me explain it like this. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this story. I love this story, so I've told it before. When the lead singer of Nine Inch Nails, Trent Reznor, he wrote a song that won Song of the Year that was titled Hurt. And if you YouTubed it later, I'm sure you'd be familiar with it if you lived through the 90s. And the song was incredibly powerful, and it talked about somebody who, within their life, how they continually did things that led to their own destruction. How they, not just through decisions, but through actually deliberately inflicting pain, did things that led to their own destruction. And it was this incredibly, if you listen to it, it was this incredibly powerful song. And then years later, Johnny Cash, late in his life, asked if he could cover the song. And Trent Reznor kind of like, oh yeah, it's Johnny Cash, thinking like, it's going to mean nothing, but sure, yeah, it's cool to have Johnny Cash cover one of my songs. So he allowed him to do it. And so Johnny Cash went into the studio and he covered the song and he sent a copy to Trent Reznor. And Trent listened to it once through. And he said he just wept. He just cried. He was depressed. Because he said that song wasn't mine anymore. He said, when I heard Johnny Cash sing it, for me, most of my pain was self-inflicted. When I heard him sing it in light of all his life experiences and all the things that he's gone through, I knew that he owned that song, that it was no longer mine, but he owned it because it was what he had lived. And I love that idea of owning things. And when we talk about it, we'll say like when somebody does really well with a song or something artistic, we'll say they owned it. It was who they were. We'll say that when someone does theater or in a movie or something like that, they owned that role. We'll say it in sports. Somebody blocks a shot. They owned him. And we use that phrase commonly, that idea of someone owning a piece of art or something that they do or a talent that they possess. But we never talk about it in the realm of virtues. The idea of someone inherently owning a virtue. Because here's the distinction, and this is what's so important, is that we are called to be faithful. But we do not own faithfulness. You can own faith. Like, as you begin to move in your life and as you go through different experiences and you exhibit faith within those, that faith less becomes an idea and something that is a part of you. And as you continue to do those things and act in faith, your faith grows and it builds. But inherently, you do not own faithfulness. You are pursuing faithfulness. But within that understanding that you may own faith but not perfect faithfulness is the acknowledgement that there are going to be times that you get weak and that you struggle. And it's usually there that we begin telling the story that this is where God leaves me. Because I've already been through so much, because I have struggled here at this point in time, this must be where God abandons me. But it's there that we see the greatest distinction between ourselves and God. Because while we are called to be faithful, God is faithful. It is quite clearly who he is. It is the attribute that he owns, that he possesses. And so while we'll go through and we'll go, well, God must leave me here. There's no way he can go with me. Inherently, what we're saying is that God must be just like me. And that is not the case. We are attempting to be like God, but he is not the same as us. He is wholly different. And so where we go, he must abandon me now. God is just getting started because he owns faithfulness. And so for you, for me, we need to understand that struggle is part of our story. Struggle will always be part of our story. But God is different. In Psalm 46:1, it says this. It says, God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. An ever-present help in trouble. What does that mean? I want to invite the band to go ahead and make your way back out because we have a song here at the end. What does it mean for God to be ever present? This is how I understand it. And maybe this is how I'm beginning to understand it more and more. So I've been trying really hard. My oldest daughter, Madeline, she has lots of fear. It is in her personality to have lots of fear. And so I continually want to, within her, cultivate a sense of adventure, to cultivate a desire to do things that she may initially be scared and afraid of. I don't have to do it with Emily, my second child, because she jumps from beds to chest of drawers and things like that, and I have to pull her off. I'm like, no, have fear. But for Maddie, I've really got to try that different. And so one of the things that we've been doing recently is I've just been riding bikes, which we did yesterday because it was so awesome out. And I've been really working with her to ride a bike, and it has been a struggle. And it's tested my patience because at first she's afraid to sit on it because it rocks a little back and forth. We've got training wheels. She's fine. But that's scary to her. And then to get her going at first, she wasn't quite strong enough to pedal. And so what I'd have to do is I'd have to take my hand and I'd just put it in her lower back and I'd just push her along as we went. And over time, she became strong enough to pedal. And so what I would try to do is I'd try to let go of her with my hand. And something crazy happened. Is I would just remove my hand a little bit. I didn't leave. I just removed my hand a little bit. And she would lose all motor control whatsoever. Like my hand, which was just barely touching her back, and she forgot how to steer, she forgot how to pedal, she almost fell off once, she'd start screaming, and it doesn't help because we'd be riding along and Emily would be there with us and she'd start yelling out, Maddie's screaming in the middle of the street, Emmy's going, why is Daddy hurting Maddie? Why is Daddy hurting Maddie? And making sure none of the neighbors are opening the windows and looking out and stuff like that. And eventually I had to tell Maddie, I had to go, hey, just because you can't feel my hand doesn't mean it's not there. And I tell her over and over again, I'm right here behind you. Just because you cannot feel my hand does not mean that I am not here the entire way through and will not be here in an instant if you need me. And I think for us, we get lost within that so many times that we assume that because something has happened, because we've struggled, because we faltered, or because we use this language, because we cannot feel God's presence, then he must have abandoned us. But it says that he is ever present. It doesn't say we'll always feel him. It doesn't say we'll always know the next step, but it says that he is faithful. And so for us, We are called to pursue faithfulness. But we must acknowledge and understand that whether or not we can feel God's hand on our lives does not change whether it is there or not. Because God owns faithfulness. And so he will never leave. He will never move. He will never change. Regardless of whatever struggles you face, his hand is always